Good morning, everyone. Derek Cooper. I'm the IT manager for the Wisconsin Institutes for Discovery. We now call it the Discovery Building. Marone hired me in 2010 to come in and give him an assist in getting all the IT up and running at the Discovery Building. And I got a lot of help from Todd and Steve Barnett and TJ, a number of the CHTC people. And so we opened in 2010, and there are two research institutes housed at the Discovery Building: the Morgridge Institute for Research, which is a private institute, and then also the UW-owned Wisconsin Institute for Discovery that M does the managing of the IT over there. And so, but we've always worked together. My team actually does most of the implementation and management of the actual physical IT. And so one of the things that we needed right away was to get some place for all the data for research, and I'm sure everybody's had that challenge. It seems to have exploded in the last few years. But so we started looking at what was available in the open source market at the time. And we had Gluster and Luster were two of the biggest ones that were out there at the time. And Gluster had just been purchased by Red Hat, and that looked pretty feasible. And Luster was being run by IceCube, and they just recently had a crash, and that kind of put a little damper on our looking at Luster for the long term. So we chose Gluster for ease of management, the hopeful stability, and we were pretty sure that Red Hat would do right by the project. Yeah, and it was okay. You know, there was probably one of the most annoying things we ran into was we were using it for our HPC cluster, and we were getting all these split brains. Yeah, and that was a daily task for the administrator, was to go in and fix the split brains. So, you know, it was really easy to build. What sold me originally was I went into my office, and in 20 minutes, I'd spun up a couple of VMs and created a Gluster cluster. But it ended up being really hard to manage if you had to do what do you call it when you re-optimize? Pardon? Yeah, you know, if you had to do a major operation and moving stuff around in the file system, it could take weeks. And so it became very impractical for us. And eventually at the UW, and we all went to CephFS, and that's been a lot more stable environment for us. So originally, Marone had a form that we developed together for getting metadata from our researchers. And I took that around and gave that to people that wanted data. And amazingly, I couldn't get anybody to fill it out. And not having worked with researchers, this was my first foray into research computing. I didn't realize the amount of effort that was really required to get researchers to help you out with whatever it is you were trying to do. So I failed pretty miserably on that, and we didn't manage the data with any kind of metadata. And as you can well imagine, it really spiraled out of control, and it didn't take a long time before our whole cluster was filled up. And so, you know, we tried using quotas, but we eventually got some management software to take a look at the files, and we found out we'd have 3 or 4 copies of big chunks of files all over the file system. And so it really became unmanageable. So one thing we took a look at, which was really a great piece of software, I don't know how many people ever took a look at Galaxy. Has anybody ever used Galaxy at all? Not too many. It was really a great concept. I loved it. We had the Galaxy person come out to the Discovery building, and he showed off his open source software. And conceptually, it was great. Unfortunately, to get it to run with CHTC, it just wasn't built properly. It wasn't enterprise ready, and you know, if you ran a job, it would have to run as root, and then you had access to everybody's data on the whole server. And so it really was not ready for prime time. So that was one solution we looked at to try to manage the data better, but it didn't work for us. In 2017, we came out with the data vault concept, and M and our Discover IT put their heads together, and basically we put together a form system to hold the metadata, and it was actually very similar, surprisingly, to what Marone asked for in 2010 or 2011 when we first started looking at this project. And so, but then we did it digitally, and we had a nice little Redmine server that we set up a ticketing system with, and we started using metadata to track all the projects and the whole life cycle of the research data. What was really neat about it is we included authorized users and allowed for the use of scripts to go and scrape all the new jobs and all the new tickets that were out there. And we were able to use that to automatically provision our servers as far as users and permissions and quotas and all of that stuff. And so it became really easy to start managing, setting up all of these projects. And it was mainly project-based. In 2023, we finally followed the WIDs after about 6 years, and we were able to set up our own data vault on our own mortgage Ceph FS cluster. And we built it on Supermicro hardware with a good chunk of NVMe storage as well for performance. We used erasure coding for redundancy. This time, however, previously all of our mortgage servers and clusters and everything was all behind our mortgage firewall. This time we put it out on the CHTC network, and this allowed us to actually be able to access CHTC jobs without running them through the firewall. So it added a bigger pipe for us, and everybody was happy that they weren't squished through a little firewall. And so we had to make sure that we looked at the UID issues with overlapping directory systems. And that was the biggest challenge, and we've been working on that for the last year. So this allows us to have managed storage for mortgage, and they can access it from servers inside the firewall, or they can access it outside the firewall and be part of the whole CHTC infrastructure and ecosystem. So, and I think that's my last slide. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Em.
Yep. Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to go over a couple of quick definitions. When I talk about a faculty person, I refer to them as the PI, the head of the lab. Project data is the content within the storage, and metadata, the who, what, when. And the really nice thing about the Data Vault project in general, this started 7 years ago this fall, which means that now the stuff that we archived and don't think we need anymore can start to be deleted. And it's amazing. So when we initialize a Data Vault project, the whole concept of the Data Vault was instead of storing data for the department or for a lab or for a PI, that each PI needs to specify the project, to define the project with a name how much space they need, who in their lab needs to access it, and a couple extra things like whether it should be backed up or, stuff like that. So once they fill out that ticket system, which is a required thing for them to do, Discover IT has scripts that take that information and enable it. So right now, all of our data is being stored in the Ceph system instead of Bust or anything. It seems really nice. They have Python scripts that change the groups and create things in Active Directory, and everything is handled through that system to create quotas, user management, lifespan, et cetera. So when they need new things for the project, they need to add a person, they need to add more quota, they need to say, we don't need this anymore, it's ready to send away. Every metadata part gets updated in the ticket system and then goes past. So this is what the ticket system looks like. And you can see that we've tried to minimize as many of the red required asterisk fields as possible. They need to name it. They need to tell us who they are and who needs access, and their initial guess at how much space they need. They're usually wrong. And then just the usage wise, when project members need to access the data, if they are on a supported server that we trust NFS with, it's just connected to the server, it's there for them. When our servers have been upgraded to Rocky 8 from, we still have a couple CentOS 7 machines, they had to use NFS, but now we can use the kernel driver. If they have an instrument, a laptop, anything else, they connect on SMB. And everything is still connected to Globus, which has been really nice for getting things from other departments. In general, this is the software list for what Discover IT uses. All the tickets are in Redmine, Manage Engine, handles user creation, Freshworks is their ticket system. There's a lot of random PowerShell access stuff on the back end, but I'd really like to give a plug for Discover Data. When we have researchers that have 20 terabyte chunks of data for one project, they have no idea where anything is or how old it is or who accessed it or what. And Discover Data is able to give them a web interface to quickly analyze terabytes of data and see how old it is, last access, last edit, that sort of stuff. And there has been a lot of user training required to teach them Unix file permissions, but that is what it is. So as I mentioned, it has now been just about 7 years. So we started, we've been running it, people haven't been too complainy. And now we're at that part where once they designate a project is gone and isn't needed, which is what happened 7 years ago. They're like, we have this data, we don't know if we need it or not. We sent that off over to the Do It archive. Through the years, projects have been sent to the archive, but this follows the first data that we'll be able to remove from the archive, which I'm happy about. So typically it works project-based. Some PIs will have just a big chunk of raw data that doesn't have an expected end date, like a grant has an expected end date. Raw data doesn't have an expected end date. We also have a project for shared with software where we create some Conda environments for people so when some of the labs don't have training on how to roll it themselves, we'll get that started. And then we do still have other data type storages available. Everybody has a very minimal home directory. Some of the computers have local storage. There's CHTC storage, research drive, et cetera. But in general, it's been working really well. That was the last slide, so I'll back up one. And I think we're almost at time. Did anybody have any questions for, yes?
So a couple questions. I see that you guys are basically one of the things you're worried about is PIs. What happens when you have a co-PI or a PI leaves on a project? To some extent, we have a piece of software at Duke called Research Toolkits that does a lot of the same things you guys did, but it's homegrown rather than using Redmine. It's basically a Ruby on Rails app. But one of the things we keep track of is basically from the project level, who the PIs are associated, if there's multiple ones, if there's a fund code that has to be kept track of associated with a particular project or grant effort, things of that nature. And I'm curious about that, as well as since you're finally getting to the point of eliminating data, the lots of small files case, how's that treating you guys?
So we do have one PI who at times literally creates millions of 0-length files from Condor output and then can't find them afterwards. But it doesn't count against their use. So they don't think it should matter, but then backups don't complete and we can't move files. So that's one of the things that disk over data has been really useful for managing. In general, so this, I backed up to the slide of when they create things. They can put in a project number if that is useful. If there is more than one PI, we attach that within the short project name. So if one PI leaves and the other PI stays, in general, we haven't had a case where a PI left, but there's a co-PI in WID still, so they keep the data. But I could envision a process where that would work. Generally, when our PIs have left, we package everything up. We send it on our side to the 7-year data retention, and we send them a drive with all of their stuff.
Have you noticed any changes in how your PIs think about data management and organization and how they train their research group in this area
Yes.
since this?
And I can definitely tell the difference between a faculty who is brand new and one who's been around for a couple of years in the system. Because this is not a system they're used to. They're used to saying, I have X amount of dollars, buy me some disk and just don't bother me. And so telling them that, well, we have this amount that you can start to use and you don't need to use your startup funds for. You can, but you do want to start designating which people access which files and trying to do the education part of, and if you add them, they can look at and edit all of these files. So if they really aren't part of that project, it's really helpful to you to know these people access this and these people access this. But in general, at this point, for the people who have been there for more than 2-3 years, it kind of works. And when they add their new people, we add them to the projects they need additions to, and it's been working really well.
I'll ask another question, which may be out of scope. So there's the perennial problem of graduate students and postdocs move on to their next roles, and often lab information is an oral history poorly documented.
Never.
But these sorts of things, I mean, when we're talking about exit out of a group or something of that nature, could one of the tasks be that you keep track of in, for example, Redmine, hey, can we at least get some information out of this person before they make their disappearance?
So one of the really nice things that this forces is that if there is data that is being generated for a research project, it goes in here. And so we do still need to have a minimal amount of home directory space because you just can't work without it. But there isn't enough space for them to actually put the research data in their home directories anymore. And we don't have a lot of other places other than the project. So initially, 8 years ago, it was a continual problem where people would leave. Nobody had any idea where their data was. Nobody was able to like, okay, their file might have been touched on this date and might have a name like this, but we can't go into people's home directories. There's campus policies. It's just blindly going into people's home directory.
There is also a legal aspect
Yes.
that we are not allowed to go
Exactly.
into the home directory.
So enforcing the home directory to be very small and the training of project data goes in here. It has been very rare in the last 7 years that we've had to start tracking down. Luckily, when most people have wanted to do things, we've been able to contact the user. They still had access. We could do the things. But it is a much less frequent use case.
I'm sorry, I might have missed it, but do you have to have I guess a Madison Net ID, or can a PI say, I have a collaborator at the University of Chicago and I want them to use their local Chicago credentials to get to this data vault?
So they need 2 things to be able to access it. They need a Discover IT account because these servers are managed for us by Discover IT. And then to get onto the network, they do need a campus net ID to be able to go into the WID VPN. And so we generate IT accounts for collaborators that need them. And then we generate net IDs for people who need access through the WID VPN. So we have an ability through campus to get the guest net ID for this purpose. Yes.
Yeah, it's there is I'm struggling with all my identifiers to do anything in this environment because you know, do I use my mortgage identifier or do I use my UW identifier, and is it .org or .net or something? So yeah, it has been and still a challenge in terms of the different namespaces.
Let me build on that statement with regard to needing the Madison Net ID. At Duke, we have what's called a sponsored account process. So a PI can sponsor an account for somebody and it gets renewed annually. You basically get a reminder if you're a PI, oh, you sponsored an account for somebody, they're a collaborator in an external institution, and you get that taken care of. That seems like something you might want to manage in exactly this same sort of Redmine project data management system where you've got a PI, they have a project, and they have a sponsored account tied to it.
And in our system, fortunately, so every semester we do WIT account audits. Every semester we send out a list of these are the people that you have in your lab, and it's broken down by we call them affiliates. And right now, fortunately, we only have 3 affiliates, people who are not affiliated in any way with UW-Madison, and they get that higher semesterly scrutiny of whether or not that access needs to continue.